Finally, done with it. Claudio, who had been born with the more common name Alfred, grinned from ear to ear while standing in his bedroom and looking up. This was so fucking great. He marveled again, feeling pleased with himself and his decision. He took out his phone to snap a picture of this newest feature of his favorite room in the house and watched a flash hit back from the reflective surface up there. A giant mirror right above his bed. He could even take some shots of himself, lounging around in his satin bedsheets. That would be a great way to show off his physique, he added in his thoughts, then gave himself a moment to imagine the way all those women on the app would behave as they caught the first glimpse of it. The number of notches on his bedpost would soon skyrocket. How could anyone resist this? He stripped down to his boxers and jumped on the mattress, feeling the smooth sensation of satin underneath him. Slowly, Claudio started moving on the bed, trying out different angles of his body and the camera in his hand, as he continuously snapped pictures of himself. Perfection, he mumbled, while suppressing the grin that wanted to form on his lips. If only one or two of the photos came out halfway decent, he'd easily double his conquests. And once that happened, his own channel would go wild as well. He could see it, visualize it already, and that was almost half the battle. Claudio pulled in one leg, then took another picture. The satin in his back felt cold, but soft. They would all love him. He gave himself another 10 minutes while he tried out different poses and ways of holding the camera before he finally climbed out of bed and looked around the room again. Yeah, the mirror wasn't just there for the fun stuff. It really brightened up the room as a whole. He could see the light from the lamp getting reflected and diffused a bit, bathing it in this warm glow. Perfect, he marveled again, and finally could allow himself to grin once more. It was still the weekend, but already too late to upload his new pictures and get results. Tuesday should be the right time to do that if he wanted to have his first conquest by next Saturday, which would give him a few days to choose and edit his favorites. Even though he had what he would call the perfect body, there always were tiny imperfections one had to take care of. As long as one didn't go overboard, one states wouldn't mind being led astray a tiny bit. That was the main point of Chapter 4 of his favorite self-help and dating advice book. But first, before starting this arduous task, he needed food and time to calm down again. Claudio didn't bother putting anything back on and instead walked through the house in only his underwear, enjoying the cold breeze that found its way inside through the old windows. That was something else he should probably take care of soon. He had spent the last half a year decking out his bedroom, but had hardly done anything to take care of the house itself. Normally, the women he brought here couldn't tell the difference, especially after a night out with him and coming here in the dark. But the looks in their eyes once they were leaving and could see were hardly ever good. If he wanted to turn his whole life around, he would need to polish this turd he had inherited a few years ago. New windows, new floors, and that everywhere, not just in the rooms he liked and used. Claudio felt a smile slipping from his lips. It would cost a lot and take massive amounts of time, which probably meant he'd only be able to do it once his channel made him some money. Just another reason to ramp it up, he told himself, now with a grim expression on his face. Claudio reached the kitchen and used the only machine in there that looked like it wasn't just from this century, but really modern. The coffee maker. If he ever managed to get to the renovations, this was the first room he should take care of. He had bought the coffee maker with the last bit of his inheritance, and this machine really looked just as impressive as he had imagined it would. Sadly, since the kitchen still would fit into a 70s-style housekeeping magazine, he couldn't very well let the women he got to come home with him see it. Claudio grumbled as he made himself a cup of coffee, then walked over to the ancient-looking fridge and took out one of the ready-made meals. He remembered some words a woman had told him just 2 weeks ago. How he was nothing but an empty shell, completely devoid of what made a human in the first place. The food tasted sour after that. He would have preferred the insults or curses, but those words wouldn't stop stinging. Claudio threw the meal in the trash, dumped the coffee into the sink, and marched back out of the kitchen. He would show her, he promised himself, before forcing his thoughts into another direction. All he needed to do was get his mind off of those damned words and back to the matter at hand. The pictures. He had spent the whole day mounting the mirror above his bed, and now he would finally reap the rewards. Claudio almost ran toward the computer he still kept in the living room. Just 2 or 3 of the dozens he had taken had to look good, he repeated in his mind. That would be enough. He booted up the machine and started feeling a slight yet cold draft. If only it was summer again, Claudio thought, but continued watching the screen that was now slowly starting to show signs of life. Even his computer was well past its time already. He would have loved to get himself one of the slicker, newer models, but his inheritance had run out long before then. If things were different, he could have simply sold the house and moved to a less expensive area, but that would pretty much kill his chances of getting his channel off the ground. He needed to be where the parties were, where high society mingled. If he ever managed to snag even a C to D-list star, he'd become pretty much famous overnight. So, he endured the cold draft and the long wait until his computer finally came fully alive, and Claudio could take a look at the photos. The first few were almost completely out of focus. He had moved around too much in his excitement. In the next, he had this strange expression on his face. That half smirk made him look like some smarmy used car salesman. Claudio shook his head. No, that one had to be deleted immediately. Slowly, he started clicking through the pictures. Wrong posture. His leg was out of frame. One hand had moved and looked blurred. In another one, his abs didn't pop. Claudio grew increasingly frustrated. There was something wrong with every picture he looked at. His posture, his smile, or even his, for lack of a better word, aura. He didn't look desirable at all. Finally, with a groan already on his lips, he clicked on the last image, but this time his throat almost closed up. The picture was perfect. He could feel his heart beating faster. This was what he had hoped for, an absolutely stunning representation of himself. He looked serene, at ease, but his eyes were glowing fiercely. It felt almost like he was staring out through the picture. This one was a masterpiece. His posture was relaxed, but firm. The smile showed his perfect teeth, but not too much. Claudio could feel himself starting to grin now as well. Not a single woman would be able to see this and not stop for at least a moment. This one would catch their attention. He could even use it as the header of his channel. Draw in all those incels and losers. Claudio started playing around with saturation and contrast levels to get a better feel for the picture. The atmosphere changed as the image got darker. His eyes and teeth almost popped out, while the shadows around his half-naked form seemed to come to life. One of them looked like a slender arm draped over his chest. Claudio could feel a chill. This was even better. For some reason, the incidence of light formed shadows that looked like a woman lying next to him, cuddling him. At first, it was only a hint, a wisp of her that could be seen. But slowly, Claudio managed to bring out her form better and better. She had long hair, but was nude, and her face looked almost nestled in the crook of his neck, while one arm lay across his body. Like a lover's embrace. Claudio could feel his heart beating quicker. He could use this, he told himself. This naked shadow shouldn't be totally visible, but if he managed to keep it in just enough to let the people who'd spend time looking at it closely catch a hint or a glimpse of it, it might boost his chances even more. He'd have his pick of women soon. Claudio spent the next hours playing around with the photo, changing it up and then saving the different versions to his hard drive before sending the backup to the cloud. In the end, he had 20 variations of the same picture, all of them saved neatly in one location with descriptive titles. That should be enough, he told himself, then finally shut down his computer before standing up and stretching his limbs. He knew he should hit the gym, but looking outside into the cold and dreary night seemed to sap any kind of motivation he had. After lifting the mirror all day long, working with his hands above his head, he should have gotten enough of a workout. Claudio calmed himself down. Nothing bad would happen if he skipped it once. Also, he would have to drive 20 minutes there. He'd have to get dressed first, and right now he felt dead tired and completely exhausted. His social batteries were empty. Tonight, he would simply sleep in. Relax and enjoy the mirror above his bed. Tomorrow, Sunday, he could hit the gym that much harder. Claudio nodded to himself as he started walking toward the bathroom, now whistling a happy tune. His life would get even better soon. The cold breeze seemed to follow him into the shower, but his mind was already elsewhere. Not even 2 years ago, he'd been a loser, a nothing, almost as sad and pathetic as many of the guys that would flock to his channel today. This one self-help book had pulled him out of his rut, and now he could visualize and materialize his own success. With this house and his channel, he would soon be able to quit working at the call center and would rise to the status he so deserved. Once he got in the groove and managed to pull all the women he wanted, he'd become self-assured enough to really change his life around. They would all flock to him, listen to him, adore him. Claudio felt a cold chill and stepped back under the shower head. Soon, he promised himself, and suddenly shut off the water completely and stood still for a few seconds. He had just heard something. Since living here, he had grown accustomed to the different noises this old house was giving off. But what had just reached his ears was definitely not one of them.
Someone had moved in one of the rooms. The bedroom, to be exact. He had heard it, clearly. Claude jumped out of the shower and grabbed hold of the first thing he could find. A pair of scissors. Not very sharp, but it would be enough to chase off anyone trying to rob this house. Hopefully. With a towel around his waist, he opened the door to the bathroom loudly, then made sure the other person could hear his footsteps coming toward the bedroom. Claude froze suddenly. The door was closed. That wasn't his doing. There was no doubt about it. He never closed doors inside this house except when he expected company. Claude waited a second in front of the shut entrance, gripping the scissors now like a knife. He was listening for more noises. Whoever was in there hadn't made another sound after the first one. He lifted his free hand, then stopped again. When had the door fallen shut? Claude couldn't remember hearing anything like that either, which meant that the person in there had silently closed the entrance to the room. He raised a hand with the scissors, put the other one on the handle of the door, and counted down from 3 in his mind. If there really was someone still in here, he would scare them and then call the police. With a bit of luck, this too could become another stepping stone in his way to fame. Claude pushed down the handle and then rammed his shoulder against the door, making the entrance fly back and open inside. No one screamed in shock. That was the first thing he realized. The second was that the window was still closed and locked. No one could have gone out through there, which could only mean the person was still in this room. Claude looked around. In a corner was the wardrobe, which was one place to hide. The other was directly in front of him, beneath the bed. He could feel the cold chill making the hair on his body stand up. The fact that he hadn't bothered to dry himself off now made him shiver. Slowly, he sunk to his knees, still holding the pair of scissors in his hand, as he watched the darkness beneath his bed closely. That couldn't be real, right? No one would be hiding beneath his bed, for fuck's sake. But Claudio still felt his pulse racing, and now sweat mixing with the water droplets running off his body. If someone was under there, they would jump at him the moment their eyes met. Some part of him warned, and he could feel himself slowing down even more. No, that was completely idiotic, another part replied. Why would they do that? Claudio dropped down to catch a glimpse of anyone beneath the bed in an instant and felt all the tension leaving his body, as all he saw was darkness and 2 pairs of socks he had lost down there a few days ago. Ridiculous, he mumbled, then rolled over and got back up. There still was the wardrobe. Someone might be hiding in there. Only this time, he didn't give himself a chance to start thinking about the possible what-ifs. He positioned himself next to the wardrobe, put out his hand and pulled open one side of the door. No one was standing in there either. All he could see were his shirts, pants and suits, still as neatly folded and hung as before. Claudio was shaking his head. This was insane. He had only imagined it, he told himself. The draft must have closed the door, and its creaking must have sounded like someone walking around in there. That was all. Still, Claudio looked around the room one more time. This tiny part of him still warned him about getting complacent. was as if something or someone was moving around here. Only whatever it was, it stayed right outside his periphery. "Don't be stupid," he said out loud, followed by a heavy sigh. Claudio walked out of the room, still blissfully unaware of that thing up on the ceiling, watching his every move. Now, in a sour mood, he finished his evening ritual. Drying off, brushing teeth, plucking his eyebrows, moisturizing. Claudio took care not to miss a single thing. He wanted perfection. He demanded it. The advice he was following was clear. One couldn't expect a war to revolve around anyone who didn't put in the effort to stand out. And this ritual had been the first he had put his mind to right from the start. Fitting, somehow, he thought. With this new profile picture, he would re-energize and restart this new life. Like a butterfly finally breaking out of its cocoon. After an hour, when he was satisfied with the results, Claudio left the bathroom, this time without a towel or scissors in hand, and made his way back to the bedroom. It might be strange, he told himself, looking up during the night and seeing his own reflection. Maybe he'd scare himself, which, according to some old myths, would bring him luck. Well, it wasn't like he'd need that. With the help of the book, he could forge his own destiny. No luck required. Claudio walked into his bedroom and stood in front of the bed for another moment. The mirror above still looked amazing. Its presence elevated the whole room, he thought. Paired with what it did with the light, this thing might have been the best investment he had ever made. He was already looking forward to testing out its effect with a willing participant, but for that, he'd have to wait until next weekend. Claudio turned off the light and jumped into bed, amazed by how brightly his room still looked even though it was dark. The moonlight reflected back from the ceiling and bathed the whole room in this strangely beautiful silver light. He'd get the best possible sleep here, Claudio promised himself. Looked up for a moment and could see his form in the reflective surface. Yeah, he mumbled, then closed his eyes. Claudio wasn't sure when he had drifted off to sleep. He could feel himself, the satin sheets touching his naked skin and the typical murmuring noises around him, coming from the house's old wiring. But somehow, he felt as if something else was there. A presence, right next to him. This sensation of another person lying there, close by, their breathing and heartbeat always at the cusp of his mind. Slowly, he turned his body, already half asleep, and felt the other person scooting closer, holding him. It was blissful, comforting. Until Claudio realized that no, he hadn't brought anyone over tonight, and opened his eyes. The room was almost brightly lit by the moonlight, but somehow the shadows in the corners seemed far darker than they should be. He turned his body and looked at the other side of the bed. Empty. What a strange dream, he thought. He could still feel this lingering presence right at his side. He put out his hand, yet felt nothing but cold air. Claudio was sluggishly shaking his head again. Just a dream, he mumbled and closed his eyes once more. As he drifted off to sleep, he could feel the presence growing stronger. Claudio could see himself lying there as his consciousness hovered in the air above the bed. But he didn't feel at peace at all. The shadows in the room were moving slowly, and the worst one seemed to build right next to the body on the bed. It was hardly visible at first, more like smoke than real shadow, yet slowly but surely it seemed to grow and form. Claudio could see the body on the bed shifting and turning, felt his own heartbeat picking up, and then suddenly heard something coming from above. It sounded like a moan, sorrowful and pained. He looked up and felt a shriek building in his throat. There, in the reflection, he could see something moving. A figure lying in the bed right next to his own sleeping body, slowly stroking his chest and cheek. It was the woman from the photo. Only now, he could see her clearly. Each and every movement of her body felt off. The hands stroking his chest and cheek moved strangely. They seemed to stop and stutter every few seconds, while the fingers elongated, then shrunk back to normal size. This wasn't a woman. No. Something else was in his bed with him. Claudio could feel the panic setting in. This thing, even though it was looking like a woman, was doing something to him. He watched the head he had once thought was nestled in the crook of his neck, but now could see that its mouth opened and moved. His body seemed to convulse. Claudio saw the muscles under his skin shifting. Something was happening to him. This was a nightmare. He tried to scream, but no noise came out of his mouth. Instead, the body, his body, down on the bed started to groan. "Get the fuck up!" Claudio wanted to scream, but the words only echoed around his mind. He could see it clearly now. His body was tense. From his jaw down to his toes, every single part of him was locked up. "Do something," he begged, and felt a cold chill as the fingers of the thing in the mirror slowly wandered down from his cheek to his throat. "Wake the fuck up!" The eyelids of the body on the bed fluttered just as Claudio felt the fingers closing around his throat. "Come on!" He could feel himself blinking, waking up while the shadowy thing down there opened its mouth again. With a jolt, Claudio opened his eyes, suddenly found himself back in his body, and jumped from the bed. He whirled around, and his back crashed against the walls as his eyes looked down and at the mattress where he had lain just moments before. The bed was empty. Completely. He could see the crumpled up sheets, stains from the sweat and tears, but nothing else. That was until his eyes slowly wandered upwards. He could see the edge of the bed in the mirror, and on it, a foot, dark and shadowy. Claudio ran around the bed, always expecting to soon feel a cold hand reaching out for him, grabbing hold of him and pulling him back in. But it didn't happen. He reached the door, jumped out into the hallway, and suddenly could hear something clicking its tongue. The sound didn't come from behind him, but seemed to have its source somewhere above his head. Claudio was too confused to make sense of it. He didn't have time to stop and think. All his senses urged him to keep on running, to get away from the thing in the mirror. He rushed past the open bathroom door and came to a sliding stop in the kitchen. The noise was shifting and changing, but it still sounded like something inhuman growling or clicking its tongue. He needed to get out of there. Run away. Claudio raced through the house toward the front door, while the strange sounds followed behind him. Was that speech? Did the thing try and communicate with him? He couldn't think about that. Right now, he needed to get away. He reached the front door, grabbed the handle, pulled, and nothing. It didn't move. Claudio was in a panic. He tried to pull at it, push it, even tried to twist the handle. But the door felt strange. Completely unmovable. The sounds above him grew louder. He could hear a high-pitched moaning in there. Shit. The thing knew where he was. He looked back and could see the dark shadows dancing in the corners of the rooms. No, he couldn't get out. It wouldn't let him. But what else could he do? The sound above him still grew in intensity. It would come after him. This thing wanted to do something to him. Claudio felt completely exposed, standing there by the door. He needed a place to hide, quickly. Running back, he looked around. The only place no one could see standing in the living room was the broom closet. Without a second thought, he ran, jumped, and slipped into the tiny room, almost closing the door behind him. The sounds above him went quiet. Claudio could still hear something, a mumbling noise. He closed his eyes to calm his racing heartbeat. It didn't help much. There was the groaning again, the whispering. Slowly, he could make out some of the words. Me, stay here. A cold chill ran down his spine as he listened to the words. This thing sounded strange. Its voice was strained. Claudio had read through some stories about mirrors capturing souls. It was why some cultures still covered them up when someone died inside a house. He could feel his pulse racing, then suddenly heard a loud groan. It wasn't coming from above him, no, but from inside the house. His bedroom, to be exact. And the voice he had just heard wasn't from the strange thing that had invaded it. It was his voice. He recognized it clearly, had heard it on countless recordings. His body moved before he could even finish the thought. He burst out of the broom closet and ran through the house. Something bad was happening in his bedroom. His mind was racing. He needed to stop it. Every part of him screeched. Claudio finally reached the door and came to a sliding halt. He could see himself, his body lying there, shifting and groaning like he was caught in a nightmare. His eyes wandered up to the mirror, even though he really didn't want to see what was happening in there. But as his gaze fell upon the reflective surface, he almost shrieked. The figure wasn't lying in the bed anymore. It was standing there, staring straight out at him. It really did look like a woman, but only her eyes and teeth could be seen as she grinned far too widely. Come to me, the thing whispered, and Claudio shot forward, not to help her, but to stop her. One of her hands was reaching out from the mirror, her long fingers already disappearing behind the frame. He finally realized what he had been hearing. The sound of someone scratching and pulling at the screws. Claudio cried out while his body shifted on the mattress and the thing in the mirror cackled gleefully. With a plop, the screw broke out of the ceiling and Claudio watched in horror as the heavy mirror crashed down onto his sleeping forehead. He could hardly see anything. Only spatters of blood on the surface, ever so slowly running down, then drying up. Claudio was screaming as loud as he could, but no sound left his throat. His hands were hammering against the reflective surface, but he couldn't reach out to even touch the body crushed beneath the heavy frame. She cackled behind him, softly, triumphantly. Claudio tried to scream his own name again and again, but the only answer he got was coming from somewhere behind him. She laughed, then put out a hand, grabbing him by the shoulder and pulling him deeper into the darkness of the mirror.